Let's get back to the New South Wales election, because major political parties at the moment are running focus groups. They're paying research companies to find out what voters in New South Wales are thinking and feeling, and they're using that to shape policies, messages and, of course, to win the election. Joining me now is the Director of Redbridge Group, Simon Welsh. Simon, what are you picking up in New South Wales? Let's talk seats and where the numbers are at.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. It's an interesting story. So we know Labor needs to pick up to win government around sort of that 11 seats sort of mark. They're sitting on the 36 or so at the moment. Got to get up to 47 to get a majority. What we're finding is Labor is performing best in areas where you get this mix of younger voters and diverse voters, and particularly the intersection of those. When you've got young, diverse voters, then you've got really real heartland for Labor emerging. So when you sort of look at that demographic profile and lay that across Sydney, what you find is, yeah, look, there's probably 4 or 5 seats that demographically are quite primed and ready to fall. You know, seats like the old Seven Hills, which I think is Winston Hills redistributed, you know, places like Holsworthy, East Hills, and even a seat like Parramatta, which is relatively comfortable now, seems a bit of an outlier demographically. So Labor will need all of those seats and more, obviously. But there's sort of that 4 or 5 that are kind of primed. Outside of that, demographically, things get a little bit tricky in Sydney. And so I think Labor's going to need to be looking to seats outside of Sydney, you know, whether that's seats like Goulburn or whether it's seats like Terrigal, and maybe even some of the seats sort of just in and around Sydney, like a Heathcote or those sorts of things. On a really good day, maybe a Penrith or something like that. So they're going to need a really good day. I mean, the polls are indicating at the moment that things are looking good, but it's really going to come down to the demography in some of those seats. So it's not going to be as easy, I think, as
no, that's right. So they've got younger voters, essentially. And you're right, the polls do show that Labor are streets ahead, that this is their election to lose here. So what is happening there? Is it coming down to, OK, yep, there's a popular vote, which is one thing, but it's coming down to what, those seats in Western Sydney, but also, as you say, up the coast?
Yeah, that's right. And so it's those sort of central coast sorts of seats, but, you know, and if they can pick up others sort of around that suburban fringe, it gets very hard for Labor if you move too far away from Sydney. Certainly if you go over the Great Dividing Range, it gets really, really hard. So I think it's going to be those Sydney seats that sort of decide it. 11 seats is a lot to make up. And we shouldn't lose sight of that. I mean, an 11-seat turnaround is a landslide. And so, you know, the polls are good. The polls are indicating for Labor they should be confident, but the demography is going to be challenging. They will need a really good night with a sort of a generalised swing across Western Sydney to pick up those seats. But the Liberals aren't without challenges either. So I think sort of that so-called teal independent, the community independents in some of those North Sydney seats could make life challenging for them in terms of getting to the 47 mark as well. So the amount of damage that the Teals can inflict on the Liberals, how good a night Labor has out there in those western suburb seats that perhaps demographically don't favour them, if they get a generalised sweep, a generalised sort of rising of the tide, that's what's going to be needed for, I think, to have a sort of a clear-cut result.
OK, Simon, we will be watching very closely between now and then, particularly on the night, watching those seats come in. Thanks so much. We'll check in soon.
Thanks, Laura.